Good evening, everyone. I, Russi Modi, welcome you all for today's LLS by one of our alumnus, Mr. Karthik Hariharan. Mr. Karthik Hariharan was a BTech from 91 batch, Metallurgy, and he did his MS from Northwestern University and his MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Management. He's an accidental serial entrepreneur who has studied, lived, and worked past 25 years across the US and Australia. He started his professional career at Boston Consultancy Group, Chicago, and has co-founded or been part of leadership teams of 3 startups, CitySearch, EdgeSpring, Glimpse, and he is currently on Apple's health software team. The title for today's lecture is Don't Follow Your Passion and Other Learnings from an Accidental Entrepreneur. And now I would like to kindly invite Sir for the lecture.
Thank you, Rakshit. Thank you, Suresh, for setting it up. Thank you very much, Alumni Office. It's a pleasure to be back here at IIT. It's a rare treat, and I'm here to share with you a few thoughts. Hopefully, it'll be helpful for you along the way. Would love to have a discussion at the end, have any questions that you may ask. Today, I'm here to share with you a personal journey, an advice that is perhaps contradictory to what many people might hear when starting on their careers. Often you hear that a good, sensible approach to pursuing your career is to follow your passion. Follow something that you're really, really excited about, that you love, and obviously if you're doing something that you love, life should be pretty good. And that's pretty good advice. But I'm here to say, following your passion, while seemingly logical, is probably not the best career advice, at least for some people around that. And there's a heap of research that supports this. There's a lot of evidence from leading entrepreneurs and industrialists who sort of are saying the same thing now, that perhaps this refrain, follow what you love, is not the smartest thing to do when you start out. For one, how many of you here know what your passions are? Raise your hand if you know what your passions are. I see a few. That's great. So hopefully I'm not offending your perspective when I say that don't follow it. But a lot of you didn't raise your hand. And I think you're probably similar to where I was nearly 30 years ago. I didn't know what my passion was. And it changed. Every 6 months, something else would be my passion. So what do? Do I follow a new career every 6 months? And sometimes the things that we are passionate about might not be the perfect thing to form a career, to make a living around that. So there's some things to think about at least. Is a passion necessary for you to have a productive, economically successful career around that? So rather than share with you research or other people's opinions, I'm here to share with you a few of the anecdotes from my personal journey. Starting back, perhaps a good place to begin is in the IIT days. When I was in similar position as to where you are today, I recognize now IIT and all of you, 30 years is a lifetime. And there's so much change that has happened. You come in here with so much more awareness and so much more opportunity than we had when we started IIT. But perhaps some of the things are still very similar. I joined IIT based on the vagaries of an entrance exam of 3 subjects, 4 if you include English, but really 3 that mattered: math, science, chemistry, and physics. 3-hour exams, so 9 hours of test taking, whose result was a rank, and that rank decided what subject, what discipline I was going to study. So the results of the vagaries of that exam was, I'm not shy to share it with this group here, was in the 1700s, and the result of that was I was destined to study metallurgy at a college in the north of India called Banaras Hindu University, or ITBHU. So that's what I did. Why am I here? Well, I went there for the first year, and I said, I can do better. What the heck? I need to try again. So I tried again. And the second time around, I rewrote the exam while I was still in BHU. And really, it was a fantastic institute. I learned a ton in that first year living in Varanasi. I didn't know Hindi. And being in a totally foreign environment for me at around 17. But I really wanted to be in Chennai. I really wanted to be in IITMadras. My brother had gone to school here. It's a world-class institution in Chennai. I'm a Chennai boy. So I said, I really want to try again, and maybe I can, succeed. So second time around, I did much better. I came in the 900s. What did that result in? I was going to study metallurgy again in IIT Madras. I said, okay, so the gods are speaking to me. Metallurgy is clearly something that was destined for me around that, so let's study that, right? So we joined IIT, full of optimism for the future, but having no idea really what metallurgy is about, right? I mean, I really had no idea. I wanted to study computer science, but fine, we'll come in here. The only thing I knew was I loved math and physics. I was not so hot on chemistry, especially inorganic chemistry. I loved organic chemistry, but not so much inorganic. I found out metallurgy is much of inorganic chemistry. So that's a different story in year 2 and 3. So that's how it happens. Life, gives you lemons. What do you do out of it? You make lemonade, right? So you come inside and you have a great 4 years. We had our 25th reunion this past December. These are some of my dearest friends. They also happen to be, I was room number 224 in this hostel, Mandakini. He is room number 223, that is 222, and that's 226. So 225 was missing. He didn't come for the reunion. So, and their stories are going to be probably very similar to what if they were here, they'd probably say the same thing to you, which is don't follow your passions. And they all had a set of passions when we graduated and a set of clear beliefs of what, they really loved. But life 30 years later has turned out pretty good for them when very different from what their passions were. But that's their story, and I'll let them come here sometime and share that with you. But we had 4 great years in IIT. Terrific creativity, and the best part of it really was the students and the exchange with the faculty in the subjects that we loved, and there were some subjects that I didn't love, and some that I really loved. So I accumulated the whole spectrum of letter grades. At that time there was S's to F's. I managed to graduate without a single F, but I got every other grade that you could get in there. I had E's, I had D's, I had C's, I had B's, I had S's, I had the whole spectrum of grades around that. Along the way, as part of metallurgy, we also had the chance to visit various industries. And we visited many of the steel plants in this country. And as a metallurgist, that's fascinating. You go there and you see, Billai and Tata Steel and some of these major steel plants, and it was awe-inspiring. You see steel produced, you see raw iron ore being transformed into steel and products that are the foundation of an industrial economy. Without that, there is really no growth. Bits and bytes don't build buildings. It is steel and concrete. So it was awesome to see that. It was amazing to see the sheer power of transformation, the energy that is going in there. But it also shared with me something. As awesome as those industries were, as phenomenal as they are to the production of GDP, etc., it was not for me. It reiterated something to me. While I wasn't still sure what my passion was, I was also pretty clear that I did not want to be there. I did not want to be at a steel plant. No offense to anybody who wanted to be there, but that was not my calling around that. I like to think it was not because I wanted to be inside air-conditioned rooms, but that was a nice byproduct. Once you visit a steel plant in the middle of summer when it's 45 degrees and stand next to a blast furnace. But it was not that. It was more around my interests were in areas that were different. So I recognized this is foundational, this is phenomenal as an industry, but it is probably not for me around that. So I was then thinking, okay, how do I parlay what I've learned into future growth opportunities around that? And I decided to apply for graduate school. And I said, if I could not be part of the computer industry, as part of the bits and bytes that do that, maybe I can be part of that technology industry. And this was back in 1990s, right, when I was graduating. Microsoft and Intel were just an Apple. These were the companies that were being established and were in phenomenal growth. And I said, could I be part of the revolution that powers this industry? The chips, the electronic materials. Because if you need computers, you need chips. If you need chips, you need materials. If you need materials, there's an opportunity for a material scientist. So that's what I went and did. Thanks to a variety of institutions, I then got admitted into one of the premier institutes for graduate studies in material science, Northwestern University. This is a view of the campus, Northwestern, and the backdrop is the great city of Chicago, which, once they sent me this brochure, nowadays you'll see it on the web, but I got this brochure and I said, that's where I want to be. It's looking phenomenal, and the department is terrific. It was the, I think, second ranked department in the country, in the US, and it oscillated between 1 and 3. It was the first material science department in the world. And they really approach material science as a cross-functional discipline that spanned really metals, ceramics, electronic materials. I said, that sounds really fascinating. Let me go there and let me, throw my lot to be a part of Northwestern. Once we reached Northwestern, and the department was phenomenal, they welcomed me with open arms, and the program there was a straight integrated PhD program. And I had a choice of different universities, but I picked Northwestern, but I didn't think too much about this. But once I arrived there and did the orientation in the department, I sort of thought maybe it'd be good to get a master's first and then decide whether I want to do a PhD. Because I saw the industry might be there, I might be able to get some experience working in an industry as opposed to doing a PhD. So as part of our process there, advisors would allow you to select your thesis program. And then you go and talk to them and they interview you, you interview them. It was a complete free market economy out there. As part of that, I shared with the advisors and the professors and the faculty, I might be interested in stopping with a master's. I'm not sure, so let me tell you that up front, but I'm really interested in electronic materials. And the couple of faculty who did work in that area said this to me. They said, we really applaud your honesty and integrity for telling us that you might stop with a master's, but I must tell you, all my funding is for direct PhDs only. So as much as it hates me and pains me, we can't offer you a role to pursue electronic materials. But what we can do is you can do some other areas in this university, but it's not electronic materials. I'm like, dang. But anyway, I was glad I was transparent. That's how you live your life. And the chips fall where they fall. And I started doing PhD work or master's work on intermetallic compounds, which are used for powering aircraft engines and really all the revolution that takes place in advanced flights and around that is driven by research that happened in that area, which was fascinating. Now, I was going through this, and about 2.5 years into the program, I was doing work in atom probe field microscopy, which investigates atomic structure, really at the atomic level of what are really the really elemental properties that drive outstanding behavior of these materials. And one night, after running an experiment for the entire night, and you do it in complete darkness, the labs have about 50 photons of light. To give you an idea, a tungsten bulb gives out about 10 to the power of 22 photons. So there's very little photons that in that lab. You're pretty much in complete darkness, and it's amazing how your eye gets trained to actually, after 2 hours in complete darkness, it feels like daylight. You can spot everything in there, and you can operate extremely well. And then I was leaving the lab at about 5 a.m., and I was thinking to myself, a reflection back to about 2-3 years ago, this is not what I want to be doing. Learning more and more about less and less, which is essentially the essence of a PhD program, hyper-specialization, was not for me. I felt I was more a generalist. I wanted to do more of a diversity. I wanted to interact with people, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no passion. What do you do? So all this advice, go find your passion. I had no passion, and I only knew what I did not want to do. And I was walking to grab breakfast, and I chanced across a newspaper in the campus. It had a full-page ad by a company called the Boston Consulting Group. I'd never heard of that firm, but that ad sounded really interesting to me. They said they're looking for people who can problem solve and make dramatic change at industries across the globe, and they only required people who have got strong quantitative skills, check, strong analytical skills, check, and strong verbal interpersonal communication. I thought it was pretty good. Okay, check. I said, that sounds interesting. And they had a presence about themselves that made you think, I need to find out more about these. I'd never heard of them before. So at that moment I decided I got to apply for that job. And I used this word called Carpe Diem. It's Latin. It stands for seize the day. It was made famous in a movie, Dead Poets Society. Exactly right. Carpe Diem, seize the day. So I hadn't seen that movie yet. I don't think Dead Poets Society had come out in 1991. I think it was a few years later. This was 1992, so as I was doing this program. So I said, I got to do this. I mean, I didn't even have a resume. I didn't have a computer, but we had computer labs. I didn't have an account, but I created one, and I went to the lab, and I wrote my resume, and then the deadline for the application was the next day. So I clearly could not mail this stuff in. And I looked up the address. The address was, I had to go to a building that was somewhere here on the 22nd floor. and drop off my resume around that. I said, okay, let me do that. And I took the L, which was the train, went down the next day and went up the elevator to the 22nd floor, went to the receptionist and I said, I hear you're taking applications, here is my resume. And they were really confused. Nobody comes to the front door of a receptionist of the firm and drops off the resume. There are channels and processes, but I didn't know any of those and I said, better try, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? And you know what? I got a call for an interview. And you know what? The interview went off really great. I didn't know anything about the firm, but the moment I got a call, I read up about it. I went to the library of the nearby business school, which was one of the top schools in the country, the Kellogg Graduate School of Management. I dug up all the books that I could find about management consulting, about strategy, and I got a call from the administrator of the company that says, we're delighted to offer you a role with BCG. And I was like, I had to pinch myself. How did that happen? Because everybody who I spoke with, all my fellow friends from undergrad who came from different parts of India, we had a network and others, and I spoke with, they said, you shouldn't even try. Nobody hires international students for consulting firms. They only hire people from business schools. You have no business background, you're not going to get in. And you know what? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You got to take a shot. People will tell what they say, but you got to attempt it. You got to have faith in yourself. And if it is really something that you want, you got to put yourself out there. What's the worst that can happen? You can fail, and you'll pick yourself up again, and you'll go on about it. So that was a transformative moment. It was one of those, major life-defining moments around that. I still haven't found my passion, but I thought this sounded pretty good. And it sounded like clearly something that could be quite relevant for me. And that was my first job in 1994. And I started at BCG. Was a phenomenal experience, and I learned about strategy, and I learned about the field of competitive advantage in the world of business. The founder of BCG was a person called Bruce Henderson. He started BCG quite late in his life, in the mid-40s, if I recall correctly, which is pretty late for anyone to start anything. But he started one of the most renowned consulting firms in the world today, one of the leaders in the impact of business. At the age of 40, he was a Bible salesman early in his life. He became the youngest vice president in a major multinational corporation in the US called Westinghouse. And when he started BCG, he said he was fond of quoting Archimedes, which said, give me a lever of sufficient length and a place to stand, and I can change the world. For him, BCG was the place where he would stand. And the lever that he would use to change the world, he felt was the field of strategy, applied to the world of business. Strategy did not exist really in a formal world or informal way applied in the world of business before BCG came about. There are a lot of consulting firms, or some of them, that existed many years before that. You probably heard their names. But they were really focused on organizational structure, operational effectiveness, but really they weren't thinking about how to apply strategy in order to do that. And what really is strategy? And this is not about that, but since we are talking about career, strategy as its core is the allocation of resources. In order to do something better, you got to allocate resources. That's the only thing you have at your disposal as a firm. Where do I put my people? Where do I put my assets in order to build certain capabilities that I can sell to my customers, I can recruit people? So it's an allocation of resources, and it's a choice companies have to make. It's a very deliberate choice that you should make in order to determine your place in the world. And once you allocate resources, you create value. And for the engineers in us, which I thought I would look up, there's a definition of value creation, which is an irreversible, it's a thermodynamic definition. It's an irreversible process, not reversible, which gives a resource order. It goes from a state of high entropy to a state of lower entropy that provides greater usefulness to other humans. That's a definition of a value creation. And any number of things can be defined as value creation. You can open a door and close a door. That's valuable. Or you can build a search engine that organizes the world's information. That's valuable. Clearly, they're not the same value, but they're value-creating activities. So not all value is created equal. And the question around that is, when you create value, you got to think of two things. How do you create as much value as possible? And then how do you capture an unfair share of the value created? I don't talk fair. Fair is 50-50. Nobody wants 50-50. When you create value, you want to capture 70%, 80%, or some number that is disproportionate to what perhaps fair is, because you are the original creators of that value around that. And that's what competitive advantage is. If you take it to its ultimate extension, if you're a monopoly and not regulated, you capture all the value. And then when you start having competition, you have to share the value because others come in with certain price points and there is a choice in the market, as it should be. And then you can figure out how do you capture an unfair share of value by offering innovation and greater services to your customers around that. So that was a phenomenal experience to learn about really the essence of business, value creation, and value capture around that. And what I learned there is that anybody can actually be pretty sound at thinking about this if you offer and follow a pretty methodical approach. And the approach that really I learned for the first time at BCG, but it's a scientific approach which anybody in the scientific world really uses for hundreds of years. That's what Johannes Kepler used, that's what was used for the scientific revolution. It's a hypothesis-driven approach where you use a hypothesis to say, what do I believe in? Where am I creating values? Why am I advantaged? And you break that down into sub-hypotheses, into further hypotheses that you then test in the market. And your whole goal is to disprove your hypotheses. And if you can't disprove it, then your hypothesis must be valid, and it has to be actionable so that the business can choose to do certain asset allocation, and it should be open to debate. If it's not open to debate, it's a fact and it's not a hypothesis. But if it is open to debate, then there can be a discussion of what should be done. Should we open an office in India? Should we open an office in China? What is the value that we would create by allocating scarce resources to one versus the other, etc., etc. You get the idea. That's the discussion, and that's essentially the hypothesis-driven approach. It's a tremendously powerful approach that you can use in almost any situation to think through and de-average a problem to its fundamental constituents to figure out where is value being created and how can I create sustainable competitive advantage in order to capture an unfair share of value. So I had a tremendous experience, worked in any number of industries, from airlines to banking to consumer goods to financial services to industrial goods. I worked in an aluminum plant. I was happy to be back there, and it was fantastic. So it was great, but something was still not complete for me. And as part of that, I realized I like to be closer to not only coming up with the insight, but also the execution, the delivery of that insight. And at that time, this is around 1996 now. This is post-Netscape, the first web browser, post-Yahoo, the first, if you can call it, search engine, and pre-everything else. And that's approximately the time. Of course, Microsoft has been growing dramatically. Apple had its first rise and then its struggles. The world was full-fledged into the computer revolution around that. And the internet had just started, and I said, oh, that sounds phenomenal. There's a lot of change happening there, and there's a lot of value being created. How can I be part of that? And I applied, again, completely through chance. I discovered a startup that was about local information aggregation. It was founded by a serial entrepreneur called Bill Gross, but it was led by two ex-BCG alumni. And I said, that sounds great. And I applied there. I didn't know much more about it, and I got in. And it was an operating role, and that's what I really wanted. I wanted to balance the strategic thinking with a bit of execution to getting stuff done, as they say, GSD. And that startup was called CitySearch, and this was the go-go days of the first internet, or you can call it Web 1.0, well before, I think, almost all your time. But that was when a lot of this value creation was happening. Everybody was pouring tons of money in to building startups. Venture capitalists were funding you without business plans. Everybody was super excited because this was the new wave where you could potentially create giant companies around that. Amazon and eBay had just been launched. Google has not been even on anybody's mind yet. That was yet to come. In that era at CitySearch, I joined as employee number 30 or 40, and we grew to 500 people in 2 years. Phenomenal growth. Anybody who's been part of companies can tell you that's a staggering set of growth. To add people, we grew from one office location to 20 locations. And it was a really, really fun time to be there and build a company and take a product to market around that. And I learned one thing: execution is everything. You could have a sort of strategy on paper, but the best laid plans don't survive first contact with the enemy, is what they like to say in battle. And similarly, the best strategy doesn't survive getting it implemented in the market. And implemented in the market, it's all about execution. Execution is hiring people, great people, firing people. Execution is getting customers, selling to those customers, collecting their revenue. Simple things that are, beyond the world of strategy but need to get done. And I learned a simple tool there, which was a really powerful management tool, but really at a core, a tool that I think anybody can adopt at any stage, which was activities and deliverables. Every Monday morning, everybody on the leadership team had to email everybody else, what am I going to do this week? What am I going to do? No more than 5 bullets. And then what am I going to get done this week? Very different. You might have 5 meetings. You might have 3 interviews. You might have, 2 sales calls. But what do you expect to get done? I expect to sell $100,000 worth of product. I expect to hire 2 people. I expect to sign 2 customers. Very different. There is no hiding behind your deliverables. People are not interested in activities, but that's useful because your team wants to know and you've got to get in a line. But deliverables is what everything is about. And you've got to have an accountability for your deliverables. And so what would happen the next week is you send out the new set of activities and deliverables, but on top of that, you had to say, what did you do last week? So everybody would look at this and say, I had said I would meet with 5 people, but I only met with 3. I had said I would sell $100,000 worth of product, but I only sold 50,000. Very quickly, you will find that there is no place to hide. Transparency was the best friend of a fast-growing startup, and people would reiterate to themselves, you have to set a high bar and you have to deliver. And if you don't, you'll be fired. You will find yourself embarrassed in front of your peers, and nobody wants to be in that position. So really, really powerful tool, that transparency of activities and deliverables is a really powerful tool to drive organizational alignment and performance. Something that I treasure even to this day. It doesn't matter whether you're a 50,000 people company or a 10-person startup, this is a really powerful tool around that. That was lesson learned for me, number 2. First was the hypothesis-driven approach. The second was, execution is everything, and transparency around that. The next 10 years, I left City Search partly because Web 1.0, business models weren't there. I felt it was something ahead of its time. People were, pets.com, and they were trying to do all sorts of crazy things. And I said, let me step back into more established enterprises where they're really creating value, capturing some of it. And I spent the next 10 years in large enterprises. I was chief operating officer of a division of SAP. I worked at Cisco and had a phenomenal time in different industries. Across all of that, I also went to the business school at Kellogg. I did an accelerated program there. It was great to really round out my perspectives. But one thing that I learned, and it's best said through a tale, if you will indulge me. And the tale goes as follows. It's an African tale, but it applies, I think, universally. And it is as follows. Every morning in Africa, when the sun goes up, a lion wakes up. And the lion knows that it has to run faster than the slowest gazelle, and in order to kill it, eat it in order to stay alive. Every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up knowing it must run faster than the fastest lion in order to stay alive and see the next day. So the moral of the story is, when the sun comes up in Africa, it doesn't matter whether you're a lion or a gazelle. You better be running. You just better be running. And that's what the world is about. Whether you're in corporate America, corporate India, whether you're in startup, whether you're in large company, whether you're in academia, where there is a world of competitive dynamics, where somebody is out to get what you got and you want to get what somebody else has got, and you want to establish a market position, you better be running. You better work hard. There is just no substitute for that. It is as simple as that. Working hard every day, running fast, and applying some thoughtfulness to that process. So 10 years later, I came back and I felt like it's time to scratch that itch again. I was thinking back about those days in the startup world, so that was really fun. And I I chanced and I joined a startup as head of product management. It was an analytics platform. It was founded by it happens to be an ex-IIT Bombay alumni, a good friend whom I met in the undergraduate or graduate days at Northwestern. It was a data-driven analytics platform. He was a chemical engineer. He had never taken a course in computer science in his life. But he is probably one of the sharpest technologists in the Silicon Valley today or at any point. But it was a tremendous product. I saw the demo of that and I said, wow, the vision of this is phenomenal. If this is buildable, shippable, sellable, this can change the world. This is tremendous. Sign me up. Let's go change the world around that. As part of that startup, I learned a few things around that. But at the core, three things. One is that a small group of exceptional people can achieve amazing things. You don't need 100 people. You don't need 30 people. Maybe you need 5. It doesn't matter what the exact number is, but a small group of exceptional people who share your passion. Oh, I said that word, your passion. What was the passion? The passion was to create something phenomenal, to really change the world as it was and to build something new that didn't exist before. And the other second thing around that is that you have to think through entirely from end to end. It wasn't important enough to just think about technology or a product. You have to think about the end. How are you going to take it to the market? How are you going to sell it to someone? How are they going to use it? How are they going to know about it? Just the entire value chain, if you will. And you've got to think about it right from the first day of when you're thinking about your idea. And the last thing is that the most important thing that matters for an early stage startup is that product market fit. It's a word that was coined by Mark Andreessen. I'm not going to talk about it much. I won't do it justice, but if you Google it and read it, it is perhaps one of the most interesting essays on the topic that is relevant for a startup in my perspective, which is how do you achieve product market fit? And I think startups fall only into 2 categories, those that achieve it and those that don't. And if you don't achieve it, you will fail. If you achieve it, you will succeed. It's as simple as that. So with that experience, that startup got acquired by Salesforce. We had a great run and the product was launched and Salesforce came and saw what we did and they wanted it to be part of their stack and the founders and investors thought that was a good idea. So that was great, but I was not finished with my entrepreneurial journey. So I said, I need to do something again in the startup world. Now with the experience and the confidence of 2 of them, I said, let me go found my own. I teamed up with an amazing entrepreneur, another serial entrepreneur in the healthcare space. And thanks to certain life experiences, now I felt like I really wanted to make an impact in the world of healthcare. We've all been either impacted by it. We have loved ones who have gone through some issues or episodes. Perhaps we will, God forbid. So I said, that's an area that is meaningful and worthwhile to spend my time. And I co-founded a startup in the world of healthcare, in personal health data aggregation. And I won't spend too much time about that. That's a whole different story. But the lesson learned from that, I'll give you as another anecdote. This was an anecdote actually from what I heard someone, a BCG partner, share. Was a powerful, powerful story, which I thought, is an evergreen story. Let me tell you that. His name was David Picot. He was a Canadian. He was, I think, a 3rd or 4th generation immigrant to the US or to Canada. One of his ancestors, when he came to the US or Canada first, was in the 1800s. I think his name was Gustav Picot. In the mid-1800s, Gustav Picot was an entrepreneur. He was a classic guy who would like to go and build things and go ahead of the hockey puck. And this was in the mid-1800s. This was the beginning of the opening up of the West, where there was the gold rush. And the railroads was the first major enterprise that was happening in the US. The Transcontinental Railway was being built, and there was a fortune to be made by those who were associated with the railroads, either building infrastructure for the railroads or taking advantage of this connectivity, right? Think of the railroads as Internet 1.0 of those times around that. And Gustav Picot said, you know what, the railroads have to cross the great river of Mississippi. It's the 2nd largest river in the US, 4th in the world. It's a massive river and it goes from north pretty much to the south. So anywhere you go, you have to cross that river. So if the railroads want to go from the east, where all the money is and all the early civilization, from Boston, New York, to the west, to California, where there's the innovation happening, you have to cross the great river of Mississippi. And he said, if you have to cross the great river of Mississippi, you have to build a bridge. And if you want to build a bridge, he looked around and said, I roughly know where I think the railroads is going to cross. If they come to the Midwest, if I were them, I'm going to do the study as if I'm the railroads, and I'm going to be picking the spot where it would be perfect for them to cross. Because if I were them, I would do it there. The river is narrow, the water is going slow, it is connected close by to a major town, St. Louis, etc., etc. You can do a hypothesis-driven approach, and you can test it, and you can convince yourself that's where you should have. So he went and bought up all the land around that area and said, this is where the railroads are going to come, and they're going to cross the river, and I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'm going to make a fortune out of that. Do you know how the story ended? I'll tell you. He was right. Gustav Picot was right. That was the best spot. That's where the railways wanted to cross. But when they saw that he was charging a high amount of rent to cross that or sell that land, they said, you know what? Just 10 miles down the river, this is another spot. That spot is not as perfect, but it's good enough. And it's a fraction of the price of what Gustav Picot is charging us. So let's cross there. So the railways went 10 miles away. And Gustav Picot was right, but he was also wrong. And he didn't make a fortune out of that, and the railroads crossed, and sent on around that. So that's a sort of a principle that guides when you're thinking about creating a product, building a business. Don't be generally correct, which is what Gustav Picot was. The railroads would cross, and finding an optimal spot to cross that would be really, really valuable. But don't be specifically wrong. And anchor yourself so early in your venture about specifics that might be changeable. And the same thing comes about. You might build a product, or you decide to build a product with all sorts of features that you think are absolutely invaluable and spend a lot of time and money, and out comes a competitor who says, yeah, that product is really valuable, but I can build one that is 80% of what that is, and I can charge 80% of the cost of what that is, and the consumer is not going to care, and they might use that. So that's the moral of the story. Don't be generally correct and specifically wrong. And that guides a lot of iterations of product market fit and of how you evolve your product, especially when your resource and capital is scarce around that. So the startup principles are relatively straightforward. When we were starting Glimpse and around that, and in any one, you identify a problem and figure out what is an unmet market need, and be really, really convince yourself, is this a real problem? And if I solve it, will I create a lot of value? You build a product that solves the problem elegantly. It has to solve it elegantly, right? You'll know when you do an elegant solution versus an inelegant one. You got to be able to ship the product, and it has to reach thousands of customers, presumably millions maybe. So you got to build the product, ship the product. Once you ship it, you got to start collecting revenue for it. You got to be able to find a way, or set a price, and get some compensation, and capture an unfair share of the value created. And you got to become profitable. Not only are you making money, but the revenue exceeds the cost that you're doing around that. And then you want to grow fast and build a defensible moat so that somebody else doesn't copy your idea afterwards around that. And the last two are interchangeable. Sometimes you might decide to grow fast before you become profitable. Sometimes you want to become profitable first before you grow. Depends of where you raise your money and how you're funded. But generally, those are the principles for a successful startup. While they're easy, executing on those principles is really, really hard. Oh, I'm on an older version of that, but it's cut off around that. But the main point is, it's really, really hard executing on those principles. Startup is hard. You can tilt the odds in your favor through experience. You can tilt the odds in your favor through really thoughtful de-averaging of the problem, finding a complementary team. Not be able to solve the problem, you will not be able to build it. Spend a month hearing all the negative things that are possible to be heard about that startup. And if you're still convinced after that you can do it, if you're still convinced that you want to do this, not for the next month, not for the next 6 months, but perhaps for years to come, then and only then go ahead and start a company. Because it is a really, really tough and lonely journey. It takes an act of insanity almost to do that, because you're creating something brand new that doesn't exist. And to create something brand new that doesn't exist, the whole world is going to barf on you. It's going to say it's a dumb idea. It's going to say it can't be done. It's going to say others have tried it and failed. You're not going to find people. Employees will quit on you. You won't have revenue. You'll run out of money. In the first startup that was, we were 1 day short of making, at that company, 1 day short of missing payroll for almost 200 employees. In the third startup that I was part of, we recruited a team, and there was a stage when every single member quit except one person. I can tell you that was pretty demoralizing around that. And to continue, but we had faith. We had faith in ourselves. We knew that the problem was real. We knew we could solve it. We weren't deluding ourselves. We just hadn't found the right team members. So we went back to the drawing board. We learned how to recruit. We found the right set of people. We were far more discerning the second time around that. And then a small company in the world called Apple came, and they said we should be part of it. So that's that story around that. So closing thoughts around this, right? I had no idea what my passion was. There's a series of events that were serendipitous along the journey that shaped sort of my professional career. And at least for my personal perspective, what worked for me is, it's not about only doing things that you're passionate about. It is rather focused on doing great work. Search for excellence in whatever you're doing. Whether you're doing atom probe field ion microscopy, whether you're doing bachelor's in a field that perhaps wasn't what you started out with, whether you're doing something that you didn't exactly think was what you wanted to do, focus on doing great work. Focus on creating value where you are, which is an irreversible thermodynamic process. Once you create value, commit to what you're doing with all your passion, meaning you wake up every morning like the lion and gazelle, meaning you're running harder than everybody else, meaning you've got more energy and enthusiasm than anybody else, meaning you're the first in and the last out, and you're doing stuff that it takes to be successful around that. Believe in yourself and set high goals in this process, because if you don't set high goals, nobody else will. Set for yourself. To borrow a phrase from Master Yoda, do or do not. There is no try in whatever you do. Don't be half-baked in your attempts around this. Just pursue it 200%. Or don't do it. That's also fine. But if you're going to do it 200%. And commit to excellence. Doing it without excellence is not worthy of you. You owe it to yourself excellence. And I don't mean perfection. There's a big difference between perfection and excellence. Perfect is the enemy of progress. It's the enemy of good, to paraphrase Voltaire. Perfect is unattainable. Nobody is perfect. But excellence, everybody can be excellent. Everybody can pay attention to the details, to sweat the details that nobody else is thinking about, to think about all the little things that matter to make things successful around that. And to borrow from the Gita, action is superior to inaction. Do something, anything. Put some thought into it before you dive into it, because that will save you so much effort and time. Don't just dive into it because you can do something. There's a story here that I like to share about action versus inaction. A man was searching for a wallet late night in a train station. It was pitch dark. There was a lamp, and he was searching. A passerby comes by and sees him searching for half an hour, and then he says, I should go help him. And he's a good Samaritan, and he goes, helps that man, and they're searching for another 15 minutes. And after that, he said, sir, are you sure you lost your wallet here? Because the light is here, and there is no wallet here. He says, no, I didn't lose it here. I lost it there, but this is where the light is. So, you know what? Put some thought into your action before you dive right into it. You'll be surprised how many people do the equivalent of searching where the light is, because that's easy. That's what I can do. That's where the path of least resistance is. That's harder to search in the dark, but that's where you got to be. So put some thought around that. I'm closing up with some quotes from people far wiser than me. We'll start back with Aristotle. We started with him, and we'll end with him. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is a habit, and it's not an act. It becomes a muscle memory. And you got to do excellent at all times. You got to do it even when people are not looking. In fact, you should do it most when people are not looking. It's easy to be excellent when people are looking and paying attention to what you're doing. But it's the time when nobody is watching, when nobody is going to come and pat you on the back for a great job, when nobody is going to say, you really did the extra mile. That's where you got to do excellence around that. And you know what? It'll pay off for you because it becomes muscle memory. And then when people are watching, you will be excellent. You can't suddenly wake up one morning and decide to be excellent. It's an act. It's not an act. It's a habit. Don't rest on your laurels, to borrow from Steve Jobs. If you do something great, feel good about it. That's great. But don't dwell on it. Go do something else great. Figure out just the next great thing that you can do around there. Go solve another problem. Go create more value in the world. Go do more good things around that. And lastly, to close the whole circle of irony, and this is, I promise, my last slide. When I was here in my IIT days, the convocation speaker was one titan of Indian industry, Russi Modi. He was known as India's man of steel. Ironically, this is his quote. This is far more than career. It's more a reflection of life. When you're born, lead your life. When you're born, you cry and the whole world laughs. I don't know of any baby that comes into the world laughing. You cry, and presumably, in most cases, people are all laughing. Healthy baby is born, and you're thrilled. Lead your life in such a way that when you move on, you smile and the whole world cries. This is an Indian proverb. It's a Persian proverb. It's attributed to many. But for me, it's a whole circle by one of the greatest man of steels of this country, ironically around that. Hope this helps. Go live your life with passion. And if you don't know what your passion is, there's still hope for that. Thank you.
It was a little disheartening to read the tagline, "Don't follow your passion," because that's what all your life, the good advice you've been getting from people around, and the self-help books is follow your passion, follow what drives you. What I'm confused about, sir, is that you brought out that you have a passion, but listening to your personal journey right from your BHU days and how you changed over, did a second attempt and came to IIT, Northwestern, then Boston Consultancy Group, these startups. Don't you think it was more about changing passions? You did not have a passion, but everything you took up after a while was something you believed in. It was a passion at that moment. So passions keep changing, I feel.
It's an overloaded term. And it's very hard to make it actionable. I have a passion for music. I have a passion for soccer. I have a passion for things that I don't know yet. How can you have a passion for something that you have never experienced? You want to change perhaps healthcare. It's hard to have an actionable passion for a career, early stage in your career. All I'm offering is a thought for folks who are starting out on their career to suspend that common refrain, because I think it puts people on a path to being locked into areas that perhaps might not be A, actionable, and B, change over time. You might think the passion is this, but in reality it may or may not be your passion. And also your passion and job satisfaction or career satisfaction are two different things. A lot of things drive a satisfaction in a career. Someone's compensation drives part of that. How you're respected and seen by your peers is part of that. Do you have opportunities to advance, even though it might not be? I might be passionate about music, but I might be working in the computer industry, and I might be having a very fulfilling career. So there's a little bit of a danger to say early on in your career, when you really are not sure what your passions are, to say, go follow your passion. That's the thought I would think about you, and I completely agree with you. Follow your drives, but don't get locked into it.
Can I just quickly take you on that
Sure.
one point? And are you saying that passions we reduce to nothing but hobbies, which we do it in our free time, and look at career entirely disconnected with passion, something that would probably bring food to table, but passion is something that would just be a hobby, one-off thing to be done at other times?
I don't think so that way. I think you can meld both. You can meld both, but I think requiring your passion to be a career, I'm saying bring passion to your career. If it happens to overlap with your passion, fantastic, right? If you happen to be a violinist and you want to make a career out of violin, great. And playing musical instruments, that's great. But be conscious about that decision. But otherwise, bring your passion to whatever it might be. You might be passionate about playing the violin. In fact, the founder of the second startup that I was on is a virtuoso violin player. He started violin at the age of 3. He is, by any stretch, played till he was 18. He was a phenomenal violin player. That was his passion. But his passion then became building this startup and building the company around that, right? So it is something to think about. I think it is the point for me, hopefully, to come across here is it's a very loaded term and can get people down a path that is not entirely productive early in your career. You've got to really, really think what is likely to be successful for a career is amassing a set of skills, amassing a set of experiences that you can use in order to truly create value in the world and capture a share of those values. And bring all your passion to that. And if that happens to overlap with your passion in your personal life, great. If it doesn't, don't beat yourself about it, right? That's the thing. And be very clear what is not your passion. More importantly, right, what is not your passion, you really should not be doing things that make you unhappy in life. So be clear about that, but other than that, that's the gray zone, right?
So, like in the very early stages of career, like the BTech days, so we have a high amount of enthusiasm and passion for entrepreneurship, but what we're looking for are ideas. So whatever we think, we find that things have already been done. World is happening now. So what approach do we need to put to actually find something which haven't been done before?
It's a great question. Ideas, there's a phrase there, a dime a dozen. Ideas are cheap. Ideas are nothing. Execution is everything. Everybody can have an idea. I'll tell you a true story. I don't want to pat myself on the back. About 10 years ago, I had the idea, wouldn't it be great to have, we were traveling, vacationing a lot, and I was telling my wife, it'd be great if there was a startup that allowed me to exchange my home for somebody else's vacation home. Can I not put mine on the market and go somewhere else and rent their home? And then I found all the reasons why that was a dumb idea. People would steal from my home, the other person would not trust me selling the home. And that idea is a small company called Airbnb, right? I had that idea. 500 people probably had that idea, but somebody chose to act upon that idea. And that idea was not brand new. There were lots of exchanges that allowed you to do vacation exchanges already in existence. It is your execution of an idea, and you've got to look at it from a point of view, not an idea, but really it's a problem. Is there a real problem in the world that hasn't been solved yet? And the people at Airbnb solved a problem. They said, when people I want to rent a couch. That's all. Everybody has a couch, and I want to rent it so the person who has the couch can make some money, and the person who's trying to find a couch can find a couch. That's great. And that's a problem. How big is that problem is the next question. Is it a real problem? Okay. How big is the problem? Okay, if it's a big problem, has it been solved for all the 50 million people who are couch surfers? No, because most of them don't know how to find a couch. Okay, great. Then you've got an opportunity, right? An idea is cheap. You got to look at the saying, what are the problems out there? Have those problems been solved? And the world is full of problems. They have not been solved. That problem might have been tried to be solved by 5 different people who are trying to do it. But as long as everybody hasn't benefited from their solution, there is still an opportunity for you to make your mark if you can solve it in an elegant way. You got to do it, right? You got to put your money where your mouth is and saying, I don't only have the problem, but I have an idea of the solution. How can I solve that problem in a way that hasn't been done before, in a way that people will want to use it more than anything, in a way that I can make more money than other people around that. That's the hard part.
Firstly, I am doing my MTech first year here. So at these times, I am having a business idea, but I don't know how far it can be implemented in reality, and I don't have people, I don't have investment. All these things at this time, it is very difficult to find out. So how should I approach? For example, I want to do a startup in healthcare. I don't have any idea about how it is going to be successful and how can I implement. I don't have any people and investment. So how should I get a startup in this area, I feel.
Welcome to entrepreneurship. That's it. So you have all questions and no answers. Form your hypothesis. Talk to people. Convince them that your idea is worth following. That's what the first thing of an entrepreneur is. He needs to collect people. And who do people follow? People who they think are going to be winners. So you got to go convince people why your solution to a real problem is likely the best solution. Why you are the person who's going to not only get them, but 10 other people Because nobody wants to be the only person. No one say, oh, he can create, what's your name? Aditya can go recruit 10 people. And I'm going to join Aditya because I'm not going to be the only guy who's joining him. And it's going to be just me and Aditya. No, everybody wants to join Aditya. And he'll turn them away. He'll turn me away. So I got to join him. That's part of entrepreneurship. An entrepreneur has to be able to find that deep within him to convince others why, and himself first, herself first, why their solution is better than anything else, and then get the world along around that. It's not easy. Thank you. Good. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Oh, fantastic. Thank you.